Hello. Hi, everyone. We are going to get started in just a couple minutes, but first, my colleague Jeff St. John is going to serenade us for a little bit. Take it away,
Thanks,
Jeff.
thanks, Bill. Song of the hour.
Beautiful, Jeff. Thanks so much. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. Welcome to a live discussion with longtime climate journalist and activist Bill McKibben. We're going to talk about his riveting new book on renewable energy, Here Comes the Sun, a last chance for the climate and a fresh chance for civilization. I'm Alison Takemura, staff writer at Canary Media. I report on building decarbonization and write the Electrified Life column, which focuses on how we can all shift our homes and lives to clean power. Most recently, I wrote a story on a new nationwide day of action that Bill founded to celebrate renewable energy. It's called Sunday, and it'll happen on September 21st. Yep, represent Bill. I'm sure Bill will tell us more about it in our conversation today. All right, so let me introduce Bill McKibben. He's written more than a dozen books, including The End of Nature, the first book on climate change for a general audience. He's been a contributor to The New Yorker, Rolling Stone, Mother Jones, and many other publications. He's also the founder of Third Act, which organizes people over the age of 60 for action on climate and justice. And he's the founder of 350.org, the first global grassroots climate campaign. I'm excited you could be here today with us, Bill.
Well, Alison, what a pleasure for me to get to be there. Let me say just a couple of things as I start. One, what fun to join everybody at Canary. You know, I've published this free newsletter pretty regularly now. And one of the reasons I do it is because I like to just draw attention to the great work that's being done in environmental journalism. There was much too long a period in the 80s, 90s, aughts when there were very, very, very few of us who were doing this work. And it makes me so happy that there's a big crew of people doing good work. But I notice just how often I'm linking to wonderful stuff that people have done at Canary, and many, many thanks for keeping track of all that. And second, many, many thanks to Jeff for that beautiful rendition of a deceptively simple song. I obviously borrowed the title of this new book of mine from George Harrison, and I was happy to learn in the course of researching that on Spotify, that song has twice the number of streams of any other song in the vast Beatles catalog. Even more than "Hey Jude" or "Let It Be," and I think it's because there's a kind of gentle optimism to it that we very much need in this very dark moment on our planet and in our country.
Thank you, Bill. Well, before we get started with our conversation, I just wanted to give everyone a few housekeeping notes. We'll plan to get to audience questions at roughly 3:10 p.m. Eastern Time, 12:10 p.m. Pacific Time. You will see on your right-hand side that there's a Q&A module. Feel free to add your questions there at any time and upvote your favorites. All right, with that, let's get started. So Bill, your book is about solar and wind energy. Why are they the last best hope for civilization? And why did you write this book now?
Well, I wrote it now because I'm a reporter, and this is the thing that's happening now. And I wrote it because I'm an activist who cares deeply about how this all comes out. And this is our, I think, one best chance. You know, I've been hard at work on these questions since the late 1980s when I wrote The End of Nature, the first book about what we now call climate change, what we then called the greenhouse effect. And every sad thing that we said was going to happen is now happening, and it's terrible and scary. And so there's a chapter in the new book that just tries to situate us where we are. But the one good thing that's happening in the midst of all of this is this absolutely sudden rise in renewable power. This is really a story of the last 36 months. Sometime in the earlier part of this decade, we crossed some invisible line where it became cheaper to generate power from the sun and the wind than from setting stuff on fire. And that has led quickly in many parts of the world to a just, well, I mean, solar energy is growing faster than any energy source on the planet. In fact, it's growing faster than any energy source in the planet's history. The just raw numbers, when you digest them, are sometimes almost unbelievable. May is the last month we have data for, but China was putting up 3 gigawatts of solar panel power a day. So a gigawatt's the rough equivalent of a large coal-fired power plant. That means they were building the solar equivalent of a coal-fired power plant every 8 hours. In California, which has done more than any state in this country to sort of harness this so far, they've reached a tipping point so that most days California generates more than 100% of its electricity for long stretches from the sun and the wind. That means that at night when the sun goes down, the biggest source of supply to the grid are batteries that didn't exist 3 years ago. And the bottom line is California is using 40% less natural gas to produce electricity this summer than they did 2 years ago. Those are the kind of numbers that, scaled up across a planet in rapid time, begin to shave tenths of a degree off how hot the world eventually gets. And that's the first time we've had anything like that in the 40 years that I've been working on this. So I wanted to tell the story because I didn't think people had any sense that this was happening. And I think I've been proved right. There was a big excerpt from this in the New Yorker a few weeks ago, and the response I heard from people, many people, all of them engaged in the climate and energy world, was, I had no idea. I had no idea this was moving at that pace. And it gave them, rightly, a sense of certain kind of optimism, not that we've got the problem licked, but that there's something worth pushing for. Because, Alison, as you know, left to its own devices, economics will get us to the right place, probably. We'll probably run the world on sun and wind in 30 years, but 30 years doesn't do us any good. If we can't get there much faster, then the world we run on sun and wind will be a broken world. So my goal as a reporter is to tell that story, and my goal as an organizer is to help people figure out how to speed this process up even more so that we have some chance of beginning to catch up with the daunting physics of global warming.
Definitely. Well, how did clean power get to be so cheap, especially at the utility scale? And were you taken by surprise?
I've been watching this all the way through and sort of waiting for this moment when we would finally get here. And there have been moments when I've been impatient in believing it might ever happen. But the story of how it happened is so interesting because activism and engineering are kind of intertwined in a lot of ways. We had one false start here in the US in the 1970s when Jimmy Carter got very engaged in all of this, put solar panels on the White House roof, and in his last budget, set aside money designed to make sure that the US did enough research and development that we'd be getting 20% of our power from the sun by the year 2000. That didn't happen because Jimmy Carter lost the election. Ronald Reagan ripped the solar panels off the roof, and we just went back to oil and gas all the time. The next big moment came right at the turn of the century, and this time not in the US, but in Germany, where the Green Party won enough seats to hold the balance of power in their parliamentary system. And they used that balance of power as leverage to get the government to agree to start what's called in German the Energiewende, the energy transition. In essence, the German government agreed to pay high price for rooftop solar power coming off people's homes. And that created the demand that allowed the Chinese manufacturers to begin to figure out how really to drive down the cost of a solar panel. And that process has been now underway for a couple of decades, and it's finally reached the point. And really, I just want people to take this in. I mean, it has reached the point where now we live on a planet where the cheapest way to make energy is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. And the second cheapest way is to capture the winds that are created by that sun, differentially heating different parts of the earth and producing the breezes that turn those big turbines. This is brand new. And it could be, if we seize it, as remarkable a moment in civilizational history as when we learned to burn fossil fuel 250 years ago. We called that the Industrial Revolution. It produced modernity. Now we need the next thing, and we've got it if we want it.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think more people don't know that solar and wind are now the cheapest sources of new electricity? And how can we better communicate? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bill.
Around the world, people mostly know now, or their governments are really catching on. In this country, there's been a full-on detailed effort by the fossil fuel industry to disinform us about almost everything, including this. And so we continue to have a president who insists that wind power is the most expensive form of power on Earth, also that it's giving you cancer, on and on. I think the biggest blockage, though, may be that for 40 years we have filed this stuff away in our brain under a tab marked alternative energy. And those words now confuse us because it's not the alternative anymore. It's the obvious common sense way forward. 95% of new power generation around the world last year was from the sun and the wind. And in this country, this is where we want to go and need to go. It's nothing about it is as an alternative anymore. It should be the way that we just think about energy going forward.
Well, given those federal headwinds, how do we better communicate the message and get it out there?
Well, there's very little we can do on the federal level, of course, for the next 18 months, at least until we've had another election, and it may take two, assuming they let us have elections going forward. But we can do a lot at the state and local level to make it far easier to put up solar power. Let's go with your beat on the electrified home just for a little while and talk about rooftop solar and balcony solar. These things are constrained less by cost than they are by the cost of solar panels, though tariffs don't help with that, than they are by the endless set of local and state permitting and licensing rules. If you want to put solar on your roof in Australia or the EU, the price is a quarter what it is in America. And that's mostly because you can do it really fast and really simply. You just call up a contractor on a Monday, and by Friday, you've got solar panels all over your roof pumping out electricity. Here, it's a months-long process with one inspector after another coming out and demanding more diagrams and things, which is not needed. This is not dangerous technology. Trust me. Were there a epidemic of solar panel rooftop fires in Australia, where 40% of people have it on their roof, Fox News would be telling you about this 24 hours a day. So we're pushing hard as we go towards Sunday for adoption across the country of what they're calling what's called the Solar App Plus technology developed by the National Renewable Energy Labs that lets you contractors very quickly get essentially an instant permit to do this work. California, Maryland, and New Jersey have already adopted this, which leaves us 47 states to go, but we think we can get a lot of them done. Even more beautiful in a sense is what's happening around what we call balcony solar, which is the way that people who live in apartments without a roof of their own get to play here. In Europe over the last 3 years, millions of apartment dwellers have gone to their local version of Best Buy, plunked down a few €100, come home with a solar panel designed to be hung from the railing off their balcony. They just plug it into the wall with a standard plug, and they're often producing 20%, 25% of the power that they're using in their apartment. That's illegal everywhere in America, except in that bastion of hippie progressivism, Utah, where the state legislature this spring, by unanimous vote, passed the enabling legislation, all because some libertarian state senator, who I've talked to, he's a good guy, stood up and said, why do the people of Stuttgart and Frankfurt get to do this, but not the people of Provo and Salt Lake City? And no one had a good answer, so now they can. And if you go on YouTube, you can see lots of pictures of happy Utahns putting up their balcony solar systems. So there are ways that we can make real progress. When we get to on Sunday, on September 21st, we're going to be pushing hard for those changes. But in a broader sense, we're just going to be pushing hard to make sure people realize that this isn't alternative energy. In our minds, we've come to think of it, I'm afraid, over 40 years as the Whole Foods of energy. Very nice, but somewhat pricey. It's not. It's the Costco of energy. It's cheap. It's available in bulk. It's on the shelf, ready to go. And so that's the message we're trying to get across. Mm.
Analysts expect solar panels, wind turbines, and batteries that store renewable energy to keep getting cheaper as we make more and more of them. Why are costs for renewables dropping while costs for fossil fuels are not?
Well, it's because they're fundamentally different than fossil fuel, Alison, and it's a very wise way to ask that question. Fossil fuel is a commodity. There's a pool of oil someplace that you've got to go get out of the ground. And over time, it actually gets harder to get it out of the ground. I mean, the first oil wells we drilled were gushers, and you just had to have a bucket to collect the stuff blowing out of the sky. Now you got to be able to go 3 miles beneath the ocean and figure out how to. And it's a huge, complicated system. I mean, think about it. You drill for oil, you have to bring it up from beneath the sea, get it to a refinery, big, huge, complicated piece of machinery, break it into different parts, get it out to the gas station, get it into your car, where a complicated machine with thousands of moving parts figures out how to light little bits of it on fire to fire pistons in cylinders and move your car forward. Renewable energy is not like that. I mean, I've got solar panels on my roof. They connect with a cord to my electric vehicle in the garage. There's 20 moving parts. That's it, and in general, renewable energy, sun and wind, isn't a commodity. It's an expression of human intelligence. Now, you need some minerals and things to make it work, and we should be as careful as we can about the mining and stuff required for them. But as we may discuss later, it's orders of magnitude less than the mining we're doing now. But once you've got the solar panel in place, you don't need the commodity anymore. I mean, the sun delivers the energy for free. And that's a remarkable shift. It's not just a shift in the source of the energy, it's a shift in what energy really means, what it looks like. So at the moment, every time we double the amount of solar energy on the planet, we cut its cost by about half, just because we get better and better and better at doing it. That's called a learning curve, and there's no reason to think that it's going to run out anytime soon. And now batteries are on exactly the same kind of plummeting curve, which is wonderful news because it means that the one limitation to this form of energy, that the sun goes down at night and that the wind sometimes drops, isn't really much of a limitation anymore. With the battery, the sun stays up all night.
That's a nice way of putting it. So in your book, you bring up an issue. You talk about how clean energy is at risk of becoming a victim of its own success. Jenny Chase, solar analyst at Bloomberg NEF, wrote in 2024, low power prices may be great for consumers, but they are very bad if you're trying to build more clean power plants. What are solutions to that problem?
So, I mean, this is the paradox. It's very cheap energy is good for everybody, except for the people trying to make money, big money off energy. And let's be clear, no one's ever going to make as much money off solar power and wind power as people made off oil and gas. The CEO of Exxon explained it last year. He said, we're never going to invest in renewable energy because it doesn't offer above average returns for investors. And that's true. You can't hoard the energy of the sun. You can't hold it in reserve. Once people have paid to put up their panels, then the energy is essentially free. And that's great news for every part of the economy except that part that's trying to make money off energy. So that's the reason that government intervention is useful here to help us over this first hurdle. That's why the IRA under Biden was such a good idea and why it's such folly to close it down. But I think what's going to happen and is happening is that wise statesmen are looking around the world and seeing where the future lies. And I mean, no one, if everyone allows China to become the only country on earth with vast amounts of cheap electricity, then no one's going to be able to compete with China about anything, because everything that they do is going to be much cheaper than everything we do elsewhere. Well, the rest of the world is figuring that out. I mean, Indonesia announced last week their plans to build 100 gigawatts of solar power over the next 5 years. Pakistan has been building solar at a huge rate, announced that they were delaying a contract for LNG shipments from Qatar because they don't need it. They've got cheap power from the sun to do the same thing. The rest of the world is figuring that out. The U.S. is is doing its best in. I mean, we're the equivalent of. I don't know. Have you had children in your life, Alison? When I had, when we had a 3-year-old, there was a period of time when her reaction to bad news of any kind was to put her fingers in her ears and scream. And that's where the White House is about right now. They don't want to be told that their plans for energy dominance through oil exportation are starting to implode because people aren't going to want it. Think about this number for a minute. Half the cars sold in China last month, and China's the biggest car market on earth, came with a plug dangling out the end. China is emerging very quickly as the biggest exporter of cars around the world, especially in the developing world. If most of the cars in China and most of the cars in the developing world are going to run on electricity, where is the demand for oil going to come from in 5 years? There's only so many Americans driving huge pickups, and so the scenarios for growth that the big oil companies have been talking about are increasingly seem like fables.
Where do you see the U.S. headed, given our ears, our ears in our ears?
Yeah, I mean it's a very difficult question. If Trump manages to hold on to power for a long time, or people like him and they keep doing what they're doing, then I suppose that in 15 years, the US will be a kind of colonial Williamsburg of internal combustion, and tourists who can get visas will come here to gawk at how people did things in the old days when they had to set stuff on fire. My guess is that we won't get that far, and that states and businesses will increasingly demand that we join with the rest of the world. A really interesting test case is Texas, which is obviously a red state and obviously the headquarters of the hydrocarbon industry. But it's also the fastest growing market for clean renewable energy in the US. Now, the Texas legislature this spring was expected to pass a bunch of bills at the behest of the fossil fuel industry to slow down this transition. But that did not happen because Texans, especially rural Texans, appeared out of the woodwork to say, our solar farm is how we pay the taxes for our school. This is what keeps the old folks home open out where we are, on and on and on. And the legislature backed away, didn't do anything. And so one imagines that economics will continue to push batteries and solar panels and wind to the forefront in the Lone Star State, just as they have in California.
So in the US already, investment has fallen by $20 billion or 36% compared to the second half of last year. How do you think the industry can weather the blows from this administration?
I think large parts of our industry won't weather those blows, and I think we're going to see decimation and it will be very painful. I mean, Trump last week issued a stop work order for an almost complete wind farm off the coast of Rhode Island. That may be enough to sink the company that was behind it, because they have to write off a 80% complete giant wind farm that was on the verge of producing lots of electricity. There's no possible explanation, no possible world in which that's a good idea. It's just a reflection of the president's corrupt insistence that his fossil fuel donors have their make life easier for them. But it's going to be very painful. It's why, among other things, we need to make sure that we get permitting reform and that kind of stuff to keep as much of our solar industry alive as we can as we go through this period. But don't sugarcoat any of it. I mean, it's not that the Chinese are eating our lunch. It's that we're serving our lunch to the Chinese. I mean, these were technologies invented in the US. The solar cell was invented in 1954 in New Jersey. the lithium-ion battery, likewise. But now we're going to let China control the technological future, and with it, much of the political future one imagines on the planet. That's a very bad development for the American economy, but it may not be the worst development for the planet. Though I'm not a huge fan of the Chinese government in many ways, when it comes to energy and to climate, they're behaving considerably more responsibly than our government is. And I think it's possible that we'll see more progress at global climate talks coming up in November and things, now that the US is out of the way.
Mm. Well, there's kind of a messaging piece, of course, around clean energy and the conversation at the federal level. So the president has blamed rapidly rising utility bills on solar and wind power, though the data shows that that's not true, and states with more renewables actually tend to have slightly lower electricity costs. What's needed to combat the tide of misinformation about clean energy?
The only way to combat it is with a tide of actual information. But in this case, the president's going to have a hard time getting away with this, I think. I mean, anyone with a brain can tell you, even if they're not a student of economics, that if you increase demand for a commodity, and we are increasing demand for electricity with things like EVs, but also with things like data centers, if you increase the demand and then you constrict the supply, say that we're not going to build any solar or wind power, then what do you know? The price is going to go up. That's the most basic first day of economics class function that there is. And that's exactly where we are now. So the president can wave his hands all he wants about all this, but I don't think most people looking at their electricity bills are going to buy it. I think this is one of the places where it's going to be driven home to Americans just how perilous our posture is. The other one is when people open their insurance bills every year and begin to understand the degree to which unattended climate change is now making it almost impossible to figure out how to write insurance for people in vast geographies across this country.
Mm. Do you think people are connecting those dots, or they're getting that message that climate change is causing
they're connecting some of them? Look, we live in a very, very imperfect information environment. We've got vast information outlets like Fox News that are just spreading nonsense 24/7. And we've got, most people getting their news from some form of social media or another, which are now the province of, bots and AI agents and on and on and on. So it's not it's not an easy system for which to get ideas across. That said, I'm impressed by how the polling continues to indicate that Americans intuitively really like solar power. They understand its appeal, and they understand it on different levels. I think for progressives, the idea of dealing with the climate crisis and all of that is very powerful. I think for conservatives, there's an innate sense that, by God, my home is my castle. And if I have solar panels on the top of it, then I really am master of my own destiny, And we can work across those kind of differences, I think.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. The fossil fuel industry has argued that a rapid transition away from their product is a bad idea because nearly 1 billion people lack access to electricity. But
This is one of these arguments that I've never understood how they make with a straight face. We've had fossil fuel for 250 years. And if there's 1 billion people who at the end of that time don't have any access to energy, what does that tell you? I mean, this clearly is not the answer to that problem. The answer to that problem couldn't be clearer. The UN thinks that 90% of people who will be getting energy for the first time over the next 50 years will be getting it not from the expansion of existing grids, but from renewable energy flooding in. And this is now really starting to happen. There was a big study day before yesterday from the European think tank Ember showing that solar is now taking off in a remarkable way across Africa, which is the home to most of those billion people without access to electricity. And most of them are far enough in rural parts of the country that they're never going to be a grid built out to them. But now there doesn't need to be, just as the way that cell phones, didn't require telephone poles. Solar microgrids, village by village, don't require vast utility expansion, which isn't going to happen. So it's exciting to watch. And I've been in much of Africa watching the first solar microgrids go up in villages. And it's one of my favorite memories, just watching people. I remember being in Ghana, right on the equator, hot as hell, especially if you're come from the northern mountains like me. And I was in a village that had gotten its first microgrid hooked up the day before, and I was sitting with the elders, and they kept handing me bottles of cold water to drink, for which I was grateful. But it took me half an hour in my clueless Western way to figure out that the reason they were so proud to be handing me bottles of cold water was that until the day before, there hadn't been anything cold in that town. There'd never been a refrigerator. Now, the best argument for a refrigerator is to keep vaccines cold. And nobody in Ghana is laboring under the conception that vaccines are a plot to, whatever it is that we're believing now. But beyond vaccines, people are just really happy to have some cold water and maybe even ice cream now and again. So to see that happening, thanks to the power of the sun, is really quite remarkable. And it underlines for me what a kind of gift moment we live in. The sun already supplies us with light, with warmth, and via photosynthesis with the food that we eat. And now it's prepared to provide us with all the power we could ever use through a just kind of neat trick of atomic chemistry that allows you to, point some silicon in the general direction of the sun, and out the back of the panel flows cold and information and light and, all the things that we take for granted, but does it without wrecking the planet, and does it without, and this is important, I think, also, without killing the 9 million people a year who currently die from breathing the combustion byproducts of fossil fuel. That's 1 death in 5 on this planet. I mean, New Delhi has 5 million children. 2.5 million of them have irreversible lung damage just from breathing the air. And that's a sin in a world where we don't need to do any of that, where we can provide transportation and heating and cooling without fouling the air with the smoke from coal and gas and oil.
Yeah, those are always very heavy realities to be faced with, but it's important to remember, like, what are the costs of fossil fuels?
Absolutely.
Let's see. Okay, I've gone a little bit over. I want to leave plenty of time for audience questions. So let me turn to the first one in my docket. Will the Sunday movement focus on solar or weatherization barn raisings? Are you building a movement that will do actual practical work that will help, that will move ahead despite political hurdles?
There's going to be hundreds and hundreds of events across the country on September 21st, and some of them will be precisely those kind of things. Lots of neighbors opening up their homes so that they can show people their heat pumps and and there will be people at working at habitat sites building all electric homes to take advantage of the energy we can get from the sun, on and on and on. And there'll also be lots of just very beautiful things: solar power music festivals, big parades of e-bikes, lots of kids, that kind of thing. Because we need to also make the case that this is not just more practical and more economic, but also more beautiful. I mean, energy from heaven, not from hell. Humans respond to lots of things, including beauty and the connection to the world around us.
How do you think about states or countries moving forward with utility scale solar and wind, but lagging behind when it comes to providing individuals and communities with access to these energy assets to increase their resilience?
Well, we need to move on as many fronts as we can. I think that as we build out massive quantities of cheap electricity, that will filter down in lots of ways. But the smartest way to build it is often with lots of community involvement and community benefit. The places that have the easiest time putting up solar farms and windmills are places where some of that profit flows directly to the communities affected. So there's lots of good people and good plans working on that, and we should continue all that work.
Why do you think clean energy advocates have struggled to communicate or persuade using the economic and fiscal advantages of renewable energy?
Well, I think because it's still new, but I also think because of what I said earlier about this alternative tag that we've stuck on it. It's amazing how sticky the human brain can be, and how ideas that are lodged in one place in our brain are very hard to dislodge and move to a different one. So that's one of the reasons that we do things like write books and hold webinars, precisely to keep spreading that kind of word.
One of our audience members asks a specific question that could be applicable to others hoping to advocate for renewables in their communities. Chris says, I'm going to a public meeting tonight in rural Indiana to advocate for a utility scale solar permit. What 3 points should I make to encourage skeptics to allow this project to move forward? It will use agrivoltaics extensively.
That's a very good question. So here are the things I would say. One, this is the thing that farmers desperately need this in order often to stay in business. It's what farmers often want because it offers a stable return. People who aren't farmers should welcome that because it often prevents other forms of development turning it into distribution centers or whatever else, and because, as she points out, it leaves enormous room for all kinds of continuing interesting work even on that land. When you cover a field with solar panels, you don't actually cover it. It's only about half covered, and in between there are all these rows, and under the rows there's shade, which in an overheating world is an important commodity. People around the world are figuring out how to take advantage of these new growing conditions. That shade retains a lot more moisture than land left in the open does, to grow all kinds of interesting things, and to graze all kinds of animals. Sheep and cows do great. Word to the wise to anyone who's thinking about it, best to avoid goats. They tend to eat the cables and they like to jump up on the panels when they can. So other than that, everything seems to be working great. The French report that they can grow 60% more wine grapes in fields with solar panels. So there's that too. But those are the kind of points I would try to make if I was in Indiana. And I would add that half the corn land in Indiana right now is being grown for energy anyway. It's just inefficient energy. If you take an acre of corn grown for ethanol, and compare it. Well, I was in an Illinois cornfield, so next door last summer, with a farmer who was in the process of converting some of his land to solar panels. And he said, here's an acre that I'm growing for corn right now, and it gets converted to ethanol. It produces enough ethanol in a year to drive my Ford F-150, the most popular vehicle in America, about 25,000 miles. Next to it is another acre that I've converted to solar panels. That field, same acre, produces enough electrons to drive my Ford F-150 Lightning, the EV version of the same truck, not 25,000 miles, but 700,000 miles. That huge gain in efficiency is a reminder of what a miracle this technology is, but also, in order to get it, you don't have to pour nitrogen and phosphorus onto the soil that then washes into the rivers of Indiana and Iowa and Illinois, causing big environmental problems. You don't have to strafe them with pesticides and herbicides. You have a whole different thing. And if 50 years from now we have tiny fusion reactors that are able to power the world or whatever, all the people building solar farms are putting up bonds with the money set aside to remove those panels at the end of their life. And then the field's been sitting there for 20 years. The soil's been given a rest. This to me is a win-win-win all around. In my experience, the people who don't like it are people who don't want to look at it. And I think that's not a good reason to try and turn off modernity. I think we should try and figure out how to adjust our aesthetic a little bit so that when we look at a wind turbine, we see the breeze made visible. When we look at a solar array, we see a kind of possibility for something more interesting than the monoculture agriculture that we've been practicing across the Midwest.
Mm-hmm. What other tactics are you considering in order to raise awareness and expand support for renewables and combat misinformation among well-meaning folks?
Well, we set up 3 years ago this thing called Third Act that organizes old people like me, anyone over the age of 60, for action on climate and democracy. And it turns out there's now 100,000 of us across the country. It's growing fast. It's doing fantastic work. And one of the reasons is because these are good people to be able to combat misinformation, and they know lots of people. They've lived a long time, and they have lots of time to go and do important tasks like hang out at the state public utility commissions. These are super important bureaucracies in every state that have a lot to do with what gets built and so on. But they're unbelievably dull. And they meet, all day Wednesday, all day Thursday. Who's going to go except lobbyists to pay any attention? So they've all been captured by their utilities they're supposed to regulate. But now we've trained up lots and lots and lots of older people who will take a basket of knitting or a crossword puzzle book or something and sit there all day and be witnesses and testify and organize and just watchdog these things. And it makes a huge difference. So that's the kind of thing that has to happen. We've got, as I said earlier, 15,000 municipalities in this country, which is a lot when you're trying to, install solar panels on the roof. You don't want 15,000 different sets of rules and stuff. But it's not an unbelievably, impossibly large number for people to figure out. If each one of those 15,000 municipalities had 10 people whose, commitment was to be really engaged with how local government was making decisions on these things, well, that would make a huge, huge difference.
Right. I think that's one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is just how few people it can take to really move the needle in some of these decisions.
Absolutely. In many parts of the country now, Third Act, the local chapter, state chapter with 400 or 500 active people is enough to be a huge force in the state capital, because too often people aren't involved at all. So these are difficult problems, but they're not impossible or insoluble ones.
Mm-hmm. The current administration has been hostile to solar and wind energy, but less to other clean energy sources like geothermal, nuclear, biomass. How do you think about those?
I think that some of them, I think biomass is a bad idea almost always. I think the rest are things that may or may not pan out. And to what scale and degree, we will find out 10, 15, 20 years hence. I think the tools that we have now, available right now, that scale, that can be used everywhere, that are ubiquitous and easy, are sun and wind and batteries. So I think that's where the emphasis should lie. But I don't have any problem with continuing to do work on deep geothermal or tidal power or lots of other things. Some of them may pay off. The difficulty for them all is that they have to compete with the incredibly cheap price of electricity from the sun, which just keeps getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So in order to make, geothermal power, whatever, really pay off, that price has to come down to the same degree that we're seeing with the sun and the wind.
If you had to pick one concrete action that someone could take after this webinar that really matters, what would it be?
Well, I'd say two, actually. The first is to do the things in your own home and whatever that you can. If you don't have solar stuff up now and things, right now it's time to do it. You got till the end of the year before the federal tax credits. Trump's doing his best to kill them off. They were supposed to last a decade. They're going to last till midnight on New Year's Eve. So jump on it. The EV credit for cars expires at the end of September. So that's the kind of personal thing, and it really matters. And I've powered my home with solar panels for a quarter century, and I must say I love it. The second thing is the things that we need to do together to change the basic structure of rules and laws and whatever. And right now, at least through September 21st, the best vehicle for doing that is this Sunday thing that we're pulling together. So go to sunday.earth and help. It's a beautiful website. You'll be dazzled by it when you see it. And it's not just a day, in the months and years that follow, we're all going to be working hard to make the most of that momentum that we build up. If you happen to be of advanced years like me, then come join us at Third Act, because it's proving to be a really good place to dig in and make a substantive difference on precisely these issues. Our two issues are protection of climate and protection of our democracy. And these are the two things I think most under siege right now. And I think they're deeply related. I think if we can change the ways that we produce energy on this planet, we'll probably have some effect on reducing the inequality that's driving so much of the craziness in our political life.
What about people who are under 60?
Well, there's lots of other good groups that are hard at work on this, all sorts of them. Rewiring America, Solar United Neighbors, 350.org, big environmental groups, small environmental justice groups, all kinds, all across the country. If you go actually to Sunday, you'll find who in your community is working on this, because the local, each of these local events usually has 10 or 15 groups sponsoring it, and you'll figure out quickly who's doing good, effective work in your community.
Yeah, and I'll just say I signed up for 2 events on Sunday. It's very easy to do, and I've got them on my calendar now.
Beautiful. So glad to hear it. Thank you for that.
Charles in the audience asks, should pro-renewable energy folks start using the same trolling tactics in public discourse that those opposed to it use? Should we stay on the high ground as a matter of tactics? What do you think?
I think it's quite all right to just continue to remind people constantly that this is the cheapest form of energy and that we're not choosing it mostly because big oil paid a lot of money to the current administration. And you don't have to be some kind of trolling conspiracy person to do this. I mean, Donald Trump quite openly said during his campaign to the oil industry, give me $1 billion and I'll give you anything you want. They gave him about $500 million between donations and advertising and lobbying, and that was enough. So I think it's perfectly fine to remind people of that. And my experience is very few people really like big oil companies. You don't have to push very hard to remind people that they have a deep vested interest in making sure you never have control over your own power supply.
In conversations like this one, there always seems to be a lot of talk about optimism and hope, including among some of our audience members. Maybe to close us off, can you tell us how you are currently thinking about that for you personally, especially given the headwinds climate progress is currently facing?
Yeah, I mean, what do I know? I mean, I wake up in the middle of the night scared half the time, scared that they're going to come take me away because I've been a thorn in the side of the oil industry, scared that we're going to watch the jet stream and the Gulf Stream flicker and falter in rapid fashion, scared that we've waited too late, on and on. But that makes me all the more determined to seize this one thing that really is working, this one thing that is scaling fast enough to make a difference. I don't know whether I'm optimistic exactly. I know too much climate science to be optimistic. But I do know that while we have opportunities like this, it would be foolish to waste them in despair. Much better to do all that we can, and in the process, produce victories not only for the climate but on so many other counts. I mean, as I said before, oil's been the source of so much of the warfare on this planet for the last 70 years. It's going to be hard for countries to figure out how to start a war over sunshine, So I feel strongly that we've got a moment here and that we're morally obligated to try and seize it and do with it what we can. I make no promises about the outcome, only that many of us will try as hard as we possibly can. And we're really hopeful that people will join us Sunday.Earth. Alison, thank you for such a good interview. I really enjoyed this. And just what a fun to be, just for a moment, a part of the Canary family and get to say thanks for all the work that y'all do every day. It really matters and it's really appreciated.
Oh, thank you so much, Bill. And thank you so much for joining us and having this discussion. I'll, close this out. Everyone, I know we weren't able to get to all of your questions today, but the Canary Media team will be keeping them in mind for our future reporting and live events. If you want to get more clean energy news right to your inbox, sign up for Canary Media's main newsletter delivered daily and/or our regional newsletters sent out 3 times a week. I do also want to mention that we're a nonprofit news outlet powered by donors who enable us to make our content free for everyone forever. Anyone can chip in to help us cover the most important story of our time, the clean energy revolution. We're dropping a link.
And my publisher would consider it a miss if I didn't remind you that Here Comes the Sun came out last week and you can go get it now. So fantastic.
Yes, I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic book. I think people should get it for their friends. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Donate if you have a chance. We really appreciate it. All right. And thank you so much, Bill. Bye, all.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye, Andrew.